Thanks for joining us on Coast to Coast Pest Talk.
No, that's a terrible way to start. Andy, don't cut that. Andy, cut it.
Takeover imposters, right?
That's right. That's right. So, surprise.
Hey, Andy, I would appreciate some B-roll, though.
Yes, right. Bloopers. Welcome to Coast Pest Talk. I am not your host, Gabe Seymour or Andy Snaefski. I am Andy's wife, Holly Snaefski, and it is not Coast to Coast today. It is just Coast because I am joined by Samantha Forrest, who is with Cortiva, and she is out of Baltimore, correct?
That's correct, out of Baltimore, Maryland. So yes,
Okay.
Coast is
Just the
definitely
East Coast.
right. Just the East Coast
Represent
today. Where we talk fast and loud.
Yes, amen to that. So today's topic is vulnerability. So
Honestly, like, the first word that comes to mind when you say vulnerability is exposed. I'm like, immediately, Holly's exposing me. What is it, like in the movie Shrek? He talks about peeling back the onion, and I'm like, oh, Holly peeled the onion.
to be fair, you started it. It was your idea.
You're right. This is what happens when you pre-talk about things and you just sort of hit a topic. But the truth is we're peeling back an onion, we're taking down a brick, we're getting vulnerable today. But the truth is like, it's exposure, right? It's a little scary, but you feel exposed. I feel exposed. And then I think of it like on an emotional level. I think for me, vulnerability hits really close to home. And I know, I shared a little bit of my story with you in the past. I know you've shared with me, but, I grew up in a not so great environment. Both of my biological parents are drug and alcoholic folks. And then I was thrust into foster care a little bit. But that's a whole nother story for another time. But the truth is like, I was raised that vulnerability, that emotional aspect, that exposure, you keep it hidden. It's locked away. And I think a lot of us grew up that way. And so to be where I am today or have been in a leadership position where I truly believe you have to be vulnerable with your employees because you need to be a human, right?
Yeah.
We all make mistakes. We all fail. We all have weaknesses. But that vulnerability for me is like an emotional level of, all right, I've got to not guard my heart as much as I was raised growing up. It's okay to be emotional, Sam, and it's okay to be emotional at work too. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but there are, sides to every story kind of deal. But vulnerability for me, exposure and emotional.
So I'm going to piggyback a little bit on that. And one of the books I recently read talks about how vulnerability, people aren't vulnerable around things that they don't care about. People feel vulnerable when they're passionate about something, and whether that's you love it or you hate it.
True.
So often, like, if I am feeling vulnerable, for me personally, it's because I'm fearful of something. And I've realized that over recent months that I feel that a lot. And now having a name for it and being able to catch myself and go, you know what? The only reason that you're feeling this fear, this insecurity is because you're taking a risk and you care about this, right?
Yeah.
So I think that for me is kind of a side of vulnerability that I hadn't really thought about before. And recognizing that has allowed me to be a little bit more brave about stepping out of my comfort zone. So,
Yeah, I love that. I think it does take bravery to get vulnerable, right? Just like you said, you're totally putting yourself out there. And I think as a leader, you have to be the first one, right? What is the saying? Trust is, earned, not given.
Yeah.
And so as a leader, you sort of have to put your first step out there. And there's another side of it. You do that connection piece. And I think as a leader, you buffer it with some competence. But
We
you have to be, we do hope. But you do have to be brave first, right? You can't just expect your employees to be vulnerable, or heck, in your personal life, you can't expect others to just be like, here's my weaknesses. No one shows them, that's not something we wear on our sleeves. So you do have to be brave in order to put out those vulnerabilities, those weaknesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, and when we were prepping, you and I had talked a little bit about it, and I express it very poorly. But
You
same
do a good
author.
job, Holly. Let's
Thank
just
you.
make sure we're talking about this. You're being vulnerable, but you're being brave. You're doing an amazing job.
Thank you. Well, and it's interesting that you would jump in with that, because I think the same author, and I can't remember if it was the same book or a different book, but same author, was talking about vulnerability and how we see vulnerability in others versus how we see it in ourselves. And much like you were saying, I grew up very similarly, single mother, and she worked very hard to provide the practical. Sometimes she wasn't the most touchy-feely emotional person, so I went to other people for that aspect. But when we think of, oh, I'm being vulnerable, we think of weakness. We think of, again, that insecurity, and thinking about, oh, this is terrible. I'm a horrible human being for feeling this way and for showing my vulnerability. But when we see others expressing vulnerability, we're like, wow, that is so scary for them, but they are so brave to face that, right?
I think of it as leveling the playing field. And I know that sounds weird,
Mm-hmm.
but when you get vulnerable with someone and then they get vulnerable back, we're on the same level. We're on the
Yeah.
same wavelength. We're passing a story back and forth. We get taught that in sales. Like, storytelling is a sense of connection that you have with someone. And if you're a great storyteller, boom, the sale is yours, kind of deal. And I think very similar, like you mentioned, like Brene Brown.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about, like, connection is why we're here. It gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us a
Yeah.
sense of meaning. And I think if people were to capture that more, just that point alone, that it is connection, vulnerability is making that connection with someone else. It's why we're here. We all crave it. Why would we not have it ingrained in the workplace today?
Yeah. And if you weren't going to say it, which you already did, but yeah, vulnerability is steeped in and rich in connection. And I think particularly in our post-COVID world, we spent so much time convincing ourselves that not only did we not need other people, but other people were dangerous and unsafe and whatnot. And some of us, I think, took that to heart. More than
Maybe a
others.
little.
So, recovering from that societal trauma, with speaking about this and bringing it to the forefront, I think is really important. So, what are some things that may cause a feeling of vulnerability? I think we talked a little bit about it, but
I think a better way to describe it is, if I came to you, Holly, let's say I'm the owner of the company, and I said, hey, look, the company is struggling.
Mm.
I'm not sure where we're going to be tomorrow. I'm not sure what's going to happen to you as the employee. I don't have a plan. Did I come to you with vulnerability? Oh, yeah. Are you probably going to be vulnerable back and emotional about it? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So as a leader, right, we put that step forward. But is that truly showing leadership, or is it all vulnerability? It's all
Yeah.
vulnerability.
Yeah.
But what if I came to you as the owner of the company and I said, hey, look, Holly, the business is struggling. It's not where I thought it would be today, but I believe in 6 months, if we hit the ground running, we'll be surviving and thriving in 6 months. Now I showed you vulnerability with where I am, where the company is, but I showed this sense of competency behind it as a leader. And I've shown that I'm a leader in giving you that competency piece. Do you feel better? Are you able to say, yeah, I can feel the struggle, Samantha. I know, like, things are not where they should be, but I believe in us. Yes.
Right.
So I think, hey, you should, as a leader, I show that vulnerability first, and then right back to me, I get it from an employee. So I think that's what it takes to really create that environment a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you talked a lot about at the conference that we had in Austin when you did your presentation, you talked a lot about like an open door policy, and I like to think that we create that. We have our weekly meeting every week. We
Yeah.
we'll check in with our technicians throughout the day. I like to try and stay to the end of the day and make sure that everybody's wrapping, and there's nothing that we need to be aware of for certain accounts moving forward, and just trying, from the practical standpoint, providing that. But you talk about being human. You do have to balance, to your point, balance that professionalism and, for lack of a better term, I guess, maintain a professional distance, but not from the person, from the situation.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So
Yeah.
in your example, if you are struggling, like whether that's personal or professional or what have you, recognizing that you have a person that's receiving you.
That's it.
The way that you're presenting yourself, and they are receiving you as a person. Something that I'm really grateful for in our organization that we've created is a space where people can come in and be open about that and just say, I'm really struggling because of XYZ. And I always tell people, I don't need to know all your business, right? Like, if you have a weird foot fungus and I don't need to know that. But, having that context, I think it does allow us to extend that grace and meet their vulnerability with our own, and partner that together to come up with a solution. And, I've been very fortunate that many of our employees feel comfortable bringing things to us. It's making sure that we continue keeping that perspective that's really important.
And I think a lot of companies say that they have an open door policy, but I mean, you might think, hey, I'm rambling on, but the truth is that you've created a vulnerable culture in your business, and your employees feel well enough with you, with Andy, to come and speak to you. Hey, this is going on in my life. One, they know that you're going to listen. And then when you relate back to them, that connection starts. All right, they understand. They've been through things just as much as I've been through things. And I think we crave that human to human connection of relatability, that someone gets it. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
And I think I feel like I'm still learning that today, is that when you do get vulnerable with someone else, you would be so surprised at what someone has been through and how much they do relate back to you. And that's such an incredible feeling. And it creates this sense of ease. It's an ease of environment. It's an ease to, that employee in the future, maybe they had a bad day in their personal life, but because you showed the humanistic aspect, let's say they spray a tree that they weren't supposed to, they make a mistake, they're going to come back to you and say, Holly, I know, we talked about my personal life. I started out rough today. I made a mistake. Yeah. And then you can be humanistic right back to them at the end of the day. And I think that's wonderful. And it's nice to hear that someone has created that environment. I don't know if you're aware, but like there used to be, like, Forbes used to release like the world's toughest boss.
Oh.
Do you remember that?
No. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so anyone listening, Google it. Yeah. Forbes released, like top 100 toughest boss, and it used to be a thing that people were like, yes, I work for a tough boss. Do you think those, we'll call them the low man on the totem pole employees, do you think that they had a connection to their toughest boss? No, not at all. They're like, that person is so much on a high bar, unrelatable, that person's not human, that you start to think about it in that manner. And I think there's where we sort of talked about buzzwords, is that buzzwords of they're a perfectionist, they're perfect at everything. You're just putting that person on a pedestal, and the truth is they're a human too. They've made mistakes, they've made failures. And like you said, I think there's a huge shift in the world today, especially post-COVID, and with the generation that's coming into the workforce today, is you hit the nail on the head. Hey, we need mental health days. We have to acknowledge that people do need a break sometimes, and that's okay. And I think as leaders, it's hard, and especially as owners of the company, where when that person doesn't show up, it kind of affects the dime in your wallet, right? So you want to drive them a little bit, or a lot of it, but you have to, take a step back and be vulnerable with them and realize that just as much as you have tough days and you don't want to wake up, you don't want to come into work, but it's your business.
Yeah.
They don't even have that much of a stake in the game. Let them have their day.
Right. Well, and I think some of these things are definitely going to impact not only recruiting, but retention and hiring practices. So I know so many people, and myself included, get stressed when people call in. But I think for us personally, we've structured our company so that we do have capacity in the event that someone, has to go home early, or they need to be there for their kid, or someone gets sick, or, family members. Like, for us, family is it.
Yeah.
That's like right here. So, and for people who are faithful, I personally believe faith, family's a real close second, and then work.
Yeah.
Right. And really, it is possible to structure your company in a way where you have that extra capacity to extend that grace. And does it suck letting down customers and having to last minute
Absolutely.
shuffle? And does it suck to have to do all those things? It sure does. But you know what sucks worse is having people that, whether it's for yourself or for your people, that feel like they have to show up because there's no other choice, because you're not giving them a choice like that. I don't want to be that person. So
yeah, that's a great example that you just gave too. And think about what that does to your business, or the effect that A, has on you, B, your team, and then C, your customer. If you don't give that employee that mental health day that they need, maybe because something personal is going on in their life, or they had a terrible day at work yesterday and now they got to come back to it. Number one, you feel bad. You're like, man, I got to tell that person that, yes, come in, go to work. If you push that.
right.
Then B, that person comes in and maybe they're at the morning meeting, and at the end of the morning meeting, they're gathered around, maybe having a smoke break or just out in the parking lot at their truck. And they're like, this company sucks. The culture here sucks. I don't like Holly. Andy's really grinding my gears.
Yeah.
And so then we have that's affecting the culture of the company as a whole. And then other people say like, oh yeah, I remember this thing 6 months ago. So that's what happens. And then they get to the customer's home and maybe they're not as nice for the first couple jobs because they're, not happy to be at work today. If we're not vulnerable and we don't allow that vulnerability in the workplace, we really have to think about how much that affects the culture for us, the culture for our business as a whole, and then the culture for our customers. Because I truly believe every aspect is different. But if you don't allow the vulnerability in, you're going to drive employees away. They're going to be cantankerous and they're not going to be happy, and it's going to overflow. They say one bad apple ruins the bunch, and it's true. So we have to protect that in our workplace today. And I think part of that protection is saying, yep, I have bad days too. I get it. Take the day. And then I'll deal with the schedule on the back end, right?
Right. We haven't explicitly said, benefits of vulnerability, but I think we've touched on it a lot throughout this.
Yeah.
And something that is a very vulnerable position for me is when I'm like really struggling with, I know what I need, what needs to be done, but I'm struggling with how to get there. And perfect example is this past winter. So usually we do our price adjustments and whatnot in January, February time. And I was like, okay, I know we need to do price adjustments. We recently transitioned to all digital. So everything, invoices, work orders, everything is electronic now. And this is the first time that we've been electronic. So in the past, when we did price adjustments, we would send a letter in with the hard copy of the invoice. And I'm like, okay, I know how we've done it. How do we do it now so that people can't be all like, well, I didn't know. How come all of a sudden my price is skyrocketing? Well, it wasn't, but, and in discussion with my counterpart here in the office, who is usually shooting off the emails for the invoices as she closes out work orders, she came up with the most amazing, epic, awesome system. She came up with it, she executed it, and I was like, I couldn't. I mean, I was having such a hard time. I was struggling. Like,
Yeah.
what's the best way to do this? And she just, boom. And to your point, like finding that. So, yes, taking that step to be vulnerable and talk about what is the goal, how do we achieve this, and, execute it. And then accepting that I didn't come up with that answer and I didn't have to.
Yep.
And, whew.
Thank God, right?
Delegation, it works. And, could that person be, a trainer, a supervisor, a leader in the future for sure. But that opportunity wouldn't arise if I hadn't taken the first step to be like, okay, let's figure this out together.
Right.
And whether that's technicians or, admin staff or customer service staff or whatever, that's one of the benefits that I've seen of, just a little bit outside your comfort zone. And whether she realizes it or I hope she realizes it, because I
She
just
will
super
now.
appreciated that happened. And it was like a real big aha moment for me as a leader that enlist the help of your team.
Yeah. And
So
it sounds like number one, you said, hey, like, this is the problem. You're voicing this vulnerability that you have. You can't come up with a solution. You know where you need to go, right?
right.
And you give that overarching, here's where we need to be. But then that employee gave you a solution that you're able to work through together, execute it, and you
Yeah.
created and fostered that environment. I think probably 20, 30 years ago, and maybe not even that far, I think as leaders, we don't elicit any help, or we didn't elicit
Yeah.
any help. We're like, we're going to figure it out. We're going to put our nose to the ground. We're going to dig deep. I've got it.
Yeah.
You
It's a
stifle
missed
a
opportunity.
lot. Yeah, it's a missed
opportunity.
opportunity. And what happens when you do like just what you just did? You created this connection, this engagement with your employee. You fostered the engagement. You let it happen. So that now that you gave that person a sense of purpose, some meaning to their job, man, I'm sure she feels great that we got it out. It's a solution. Everything worked. If you just struggled, Holly, on your own with this, and who knows for maybe how long, how many restless nights of sleep thinking that I can handle this, I can do it. What does that do to you? What does that do to your work life? That work life balance for you. But the moment you were vulnerable, man, I hate to say it, but you got shit done.
Well, I didn't. Someone else did. And they did it better than I would have.
Hey, and that's okay, right? Oh my gosh. As a leader, when I have an employee that does something above and beyond something that I can achieve, I mean, standing ovation, go for it. And I think that's another part of vulnerability. I think if you're someone that is like, if my employees succeed better than me and I don't want that to happen, go look in the mirror, right? Like, I want anyone that I work with to do better than me. I mean, achieve beyond what I've achieved. If I can help you get there, let's make it happen. If I can write that letter of recommendation, let's do it. I think that as a leader, all good things, will come back. Karma is a real thing. I think you put what into the world, what you get out of it. But if that person succeeds beyond me, I mean, like, I'm your biggest cheerleader. Go for it. And I think that's the definition of a true leader. But you've got to be vulnerable, right? Because you got to admit to yourself that maybe I'm not at that level, and that's okay.
Yeah. What would be your advice for someone who's looking to get more comfortable with vulnerability?
Oh my gosh. Get comfortable with, I know, right? All right. I mean, I think the short term is it's a learned skill, right? It's like networking.
Yeah.
And there, I think, are a lot of books, a lot of podcasts, a lot of YouTube videos, TED Talks that talk about vulnerability. And I love one person specifically, but there is an author and a TED Talk speaker, Lovey Ajayi Jones, who talks about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's the first step of vulnerability is you got to take a step back and realize that when someone makes a mistake, have you been there? Think about it for a second, And I think I deal with my kids like that. I think as a leader, I dealt with my employees like that. We make mistakes, stuff happens. It's okay. I always say I'm not a leader that's ever going to yell at you. I'll give you the disappointed parent look 1,000%. I've
Very well
perfected that.
practiced
Yes,
as mothers, right?
Oh yes, we all perfect that as moms. I'll give you that look, but the truth is the first thing I'm going to tell you is it's okay. We're going to handle it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first step of being a vulnerable leader is to say it's okay. We're going to handle it. And then as a leader, I think you have to just work towards the solution. But again, taking that humanistic approach that it's okay. We got you. I've got your back.
Yeah. I think it's okay to say really hard things through tears or with a red face or with sweaty pits or shaking hands or some of the physical things that come along with being vulnerable, stepping out of your comfort zone, and experiencing some of those things for the first time. It can be very overwhelming, and it's okay, I think, to admit in certain circumstances, this is a difficult conversation for me to have, but I'm going to try and get through it. And you're not going to get better at it without practicing it, and you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Which is why I was like, I have some really hard things that I am wrestling with, and I'm going to be brave, and I'm going to say it through tears, and I'm giving myself permission for that.
No, that's huge. Something that was told to me, and it's a quote, so I'm sure someone can find this somewhere, but it says, "Shame dies when stories are told in a safe place."
Mm-hmm.
And so, very much like you just said about the customer aspect, just hey, thank you. That their shame, their guilt of calling you again, washes away. When you're vulnerable with someone and you're sharing your story and then they share back with you, your shame and guilt washes away.
Mm.
So I think as long as we're creating that safe place, this environment where someone can trust us with what we're giving to them and what they're giving back, they trust us in return. Nothing can go wrong in my mind.
Right.
And I think whether it's personal home life or workplace, your work environment, I think if we get more vulnerable, we're really going to create a better culture for everyone that has to work there or live there.
One of the topics we had planned on talking about was vulnerability and its role with perfectionism and imposter syndrome. And it's kind of this ooey gooey mix of tension, I guess is a good way to put it. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh. Well, Holly, as a perfectionist, no, oh my gosh. Well, when I think about perfectionism, I mean, I do. I think, all right, that person is perfect. And let's just face it, no one is perfect. If we all could admit that, the world would be a better place, right? No one knows how to run a company 100%. No one knows how to do the finances 100%. All right, now we're sitting in here where the truth exists.
Yeah.
And the truth exists, and I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, but in order to say those things, I have to get vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And so, just with imposter syndrome, I mean, that's when all right, I don't feel good enough. I don't feel well enough. I don't feel well equipped. We started this podcast with you saying I've got a book club tonight that I'm hosting virtually. I'm nervous. And I think all of a sudden as a leader of that book club, you're settling into, all right, I'm feeling this imposter syndrome creep up. I'm not sure how to handle it. I'm not sure if it's going to be good enough. And all of that little stuff eats at you. But you shared it with me. You got vulnerable with me. And I'm like, girl, you're going to kick butt at this. Like, this is like the only time I've ever heard of a virtual, book club, let alone, sort of specific to the pest control industry, open to all, everybody and their mother. Like, you're doing the thing.
My
Be
smile's
proud
just
of
getting
yourself.
bigger and bigger.
But I'm able to do that. I'm able to say those things because you opened up, you got vulnerable, and now I can push your imposter syndrome out of the way for you a little bit, gas you up because you are doing the thing. You're going to do wonderful. And heck, throw the training wheels off because you're riding the bike. Here we go.
Yeah. Well, and I have to tell you, it's definitely not something that I would have done 6 months ago. And, not to shift topics into the book club because I'm not going to do that. But it's interesting because my coach and I have been working very much on expressing needs. And I remember the first time we were talking, I can't even remember the topic that we were talking about, but he goes, well, what do you think you would need for that? What do you think you would need to accomplish that? What do you think you need tonight? And I was like,
what do you mean, what do I need?
well, I don't even know how to start. I don't need things. I don't know what you're talking about. So going through so much of this process, and I knew in my gut that I had to start changing some things and some habits about how I'm thinking about myself and the world, and working on yourself is really important, and that gives you space to start practicing some of these skills too. So I feel like that was super rambling and had nothing to do with imposter syndrome, but
no, I mean, the truth is you're getting back to sort of the crux of it, is that when imposter syndrome steeps in, I think the vulnerable part for anyone is to say, hang on.
Sure.
I might feel all of these things, but if I get vulnerable and acknowledge those feelings, can I talk through them? And so I think that's where that piece of, if you're feeling like you're a fraud or, I'm not capable of doing this, just like you have a coach, can you talk to someone about that? I'm a huge advocate that everyone needs a therapist. I have a therapist. Like, I'm going to go talk to her about what's going on in my life and the way that I'm feeling, so that way I can have that opportunity to be vulnerable with someone I trust, but work through that imposter syndrome at the end of the day. I sort of, like, while you were talking, I was thinking about, what have I been through, like, where I've felt like, all right, I'm not good enough. And I left my last job and I came to Corteva. And before I left my last job, I had been looking, and I thought to myself, I've spent 10 years in pest control. I am going to have to start over when I leave. And that was imposter syndrome, truly. Like, I felt like I wasn't good enough to, here I am, COO, director of operations. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to start back as a CSR again. My whole career is going to like kickstart. We're going to, rinse and repeat and start over. And the truth is I didn't have to. And I didn't have to because I had all these sort of core competencies that, life experience had given me, pest control, past experience had given me. And I had to admit that to someone. And that someone was my spouse and my therapist, but like admitting that I don't feel good enough. I don't feel like I can do the next thing or go on to do the next thing. And just like you said, when you talk to someone about that, you acknowledge it. And then, I mean, it really takes the life out of it when you acknowledge it a little bit.
Yeah.
You deflate that balloon and you're like, okay, it's that boulder is not as big as I thought. I'm climbing this mountain. I'm going to get to the top and the view's going to look damn good.
Yeah. So when we were prepping last week, something that we had talked about was kind of the stories and the narratives that we tell ourselves. And I think that so much of imposter syndrome comes from these stories that we tell ourselves, whether it's about the future. And I am hugely guilty of catastrophizing the future. I'm like, it's going to be terrible. I'm going to have to fix this, that, and whatever. And, I'm constantly coming up with not just plan A and B, but plan X, Y, and Z too. And I have some inklings of where that comes from, but it's just innate in me at this point. And I think, to your point, in your example, where you're thinking, oh, I've got to start completely from scratch. That's a story, that's a narrative that you're telling yourself that may or may not be reality, but you're almost creating your own reality at the same time. Because now, are you going to be more or less likely to apply for, operations director or manager at another company? Or are you going to start at CSR?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going for that manufacturer sales rep position? Or are you going for Walmart associate?
Right.
Right.
No, and I think that's important for employees. Like, if we take exactly what you just said and we correlate it back to our everyday work environment, your employees are telling themselves a narrative, right?
Absolutely.
You can reinforce that narrative, and it might be a negative one. What do you want to reinforce as a leader? And I think that's what we all need to ask ourselves. We do set that narrative and nail it in for our employees. They might be thinking, oh, I'm not very good at this job. No one ever says thank you. No one ever says, man, you're doing awesome. No one ever shares the customer compliments with me, so I must be doing awful. Right. And if, as a leader, we never get vulnerable with sharing with our employees like that they are doing a good job, we're going to nail home that negative narrative that they're writing in their head. Right. But if we get vulnerable, and I truly believe it does take vulnerability to be like, my employee's doing amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I got that customer compliment.
It goes back to that idea of joy and celebration.
That's it.
A state of vulnerability, right? So,
yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you'll hit a positive narrative. And again, I go back to, it really creates that full culture, that good culture environment that, all right, I'm doing good. I'm happy to come to work. I'm happy to tell everybody that I'm happy to be here at work. I'm sharing it at my truck. I'm in the morning meeting. Like, yes, we all should be happy that we're working. And it just is tenfold. Like, your morning customer, you're like, I hope you're just as happy to see me as I am you. Like, it really continues to just come down and be shared with others. So I just truly believe it's an important topic. And I think, man, if leaders were to participate more with being vulnerable, it would be huge for everyone in the workplace.